Today we are going to be walking through how to create a cross-stitch Bumblebee bookmark. This bookmark will be done using the basic cross-stitch as well as backstitch, as you'll see later on. So let's begin. First, we're going to take a look at our materials. We have here is some DMC floss. We have the 444 or the dark lemon and the 310, which is black. I also have a couple of them already wound around some bobbins. Next we have our fabric. This is a bookmark fabric. It is 10 5/8 inches by 2 inches. It is 14 count out of fabric. You'll need this to make your bookmark or some other size fabric. Got our scissors as well, and a pin cushion with a nice little needle inside of it, just so it doesn't poke anything as well. Now let's take a look at our pattern to find where our center is. We pull the pattern a little closer, go down, see there's the tail end, and here is our main body. The reason we're on this page, we zoom in, you can see we have the arrows going up and down and left to right. Those arrows on the pattern show where the center is. In this case, our arrow is pointing right to where the hole in the fabric would be, right there. So that is the center point, and we want to know where that is on the fabric as well. So in order to do that, we want to fold the fabric in half in both directions. We want to make sure that we have a nice crease going along in each direction, because we want to see where they cross. And go the other direction, make a nice crease there, and there we go. You can see there's a very light indentation where they cross, and you see right where they cross, that will be our center point. And at this point, you can choose which side you want to be your front or your back. It doesn't really matter, it's mostly up to your own preference. To thread the needle, we'll need our floss, which in this case is around our bobbin, the scissors, and our needle, of course, which is in our little handy dandy pin cushion. So I'm going to pull out about 18 inches or so, maybe a little bit more, a little bit less, of the floss. Oops. And that's good enough, so I'll cut it there. Put this side. And I'll go to this end. It's a little more frayed. This is what we want. You can see the floss is made of different strands. What we want to do is grab one singular strand, and while gently holding on to the rest, I'm going to pull that strand out. And keep pulling until it's completely out, like so. And we can put these strands aside for later. And with the one that we pulled out, I want to put the two ends together. So we have that end and this one. Put them together. You want to get as close as even as possible. And fold it in half. Then with our needle, we want to stick that folded end into the eye of our needle. which can be a little bit difficult, but have patience. There we go. Now it's through. Stick the point of the needle through that loop, and then tug the opposite end, and it should be secured on the needle. So right now I have the needle marking from back to front the midpoint of our design, which again is that cross right there. So in order to start our first row of 4 stitches, we want to be at the bottom left corner of the leftmost stitch. So in order to do that, we want to go over 2 holes to the left and down 1. And remember, we want to start from the back. So I'm going to flip this over, and we want to go over 1, 2, and down 1. So now from center point, we are over 2 to the left in the front and down 1. Remember, we have our needle going from back to front. We are going to pull the thread through almost all the way. Flip this over to show you. We want to pull almost all the way through, but we want about that much. So maybe just about an inch. A little bit less is okay, but we want to make sure we have our tail secured with our fingers at the moment in the back. We do not want to pull that through. So once we have that from the front again, we want to begin the first part of our crosses for cross stitching. So we want to go from that bottom left corner to the top right of the same stitch. So we're going through our bottom left right now, and we want to go to the top, right and pull that through, making sure to keep the tail secured in the back. Remember, we do not want to pull that through. Okay, and there's 1/2 of our cross. Now we want to go to the back side. Remember, we have that tail. We want to go over the tail and down 1. So we want to be right to the side of where we first pulled our stitch through, and pull that through. And we want to make sure our tail is now secured by that bit of thread that we just pulled through. So now we don't have to hold it with my fingers. It should be secured by that thread. And we want to complete that same process going over the next 3 stitches. So from bottom left to top right, pull through, flip it over. I want to go down and over that tail end again, just to make sure it's secured. And pull through again, flipping over. Now we have 2. There's 2 more to do. Okay, so now we have the first half of our crosses done for the top row of 4. Now we're going to do something very similar, but we want to go back to the left. So remember, when you're starting a row, you always want to go left to right, and then go back from right to left. So we're going to go back to the back, go down and over, so the next hole down, just like we have been doing, pull through, and then instead of going to the top right of the next stitch, we want to go back to the top left of the stitch that we are currently on, and pull through. And there we have our first cross. Now we want to continue that pattern just like we did when we were going left to right, but this time the opposite direction. So go down in the back, then up through the bottom right and to the top left. And we want to stop once we've gone through the top left of our leftmost stitch. Okay, now we've completed our first row of 4. Now to go down the row, we have just gone through from the front to back the top left hole of the leftmost stitch of that row. So we want to flip it over once again. Instead of going just down one hole, we want to go down 2, since that next stitch is directly below the stitch we are currently doing. Because remember, we always want to be, when we start a new row, in the bottom left corner of the leftmost stitch of the same color. So you pull through, and now you're free to continue making stitches just like we did the first time. As we see here, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches, just like before, of the black. Okay. So now we have that first 2x4 rectangle done for our bumblebee. Now you can see the next 2 rows are going to be yellow. So we do not want to skip more than 4 holes in any direction in order to go to the next stitch of the same color. So since that will be too far to get to the bottom left of the next black stitch that we will be working on, which would be right here, we want to secure the excess thread by going to the back. And you see we have the threads here, the stitches here from the back that we've been working on. We want to pull the needle and the excess thread through at least 3 of those. There we have our needle through 3, and then pull, and now that is secure. Now the last bit we want to do is we want to take our scissors and snip off that excess, and there we are. We have the first rectangle of our bumblebee. Now, as we can see, for our cross stitches, which are marked by the colored squares, it's just a lot of rows with different colors, the black and the yellow. So we want to make cross stitches where the pattern indicates all the way down until the bottom of the bee's head. Remember, we are going from up top here. We just did these 2 rows to make that rectangle, and we are going all the way down to the bottom. right now we're working on cross-stitching the head, as you can see. And since each of these rows for the head are all in the same color, that DMC 310 black thread, I haven't had to switch out the thread in my needle just yet. But at this point, it's getting pretty short, and I'm not sure if I can do an entire row with what I have left. Once you get to this point, switch out the thread in your needle and rethread the needle with a new thread of that black DMC 310. Every time you start a new row, you always want to make sure that you have enough thread to finish that row completely. And that's going from left to right and then right to left again. You want to make sure all the cross stitches are complete and both tail ends are secured in the back before you run out of thread. Now we are going to work on the back stitches, which make up the antenna, the wings, and the trail that goes from the little stinger at the end of our bee. So we'll start with the antenna. We'll look here, as you can see, that the back stitches are noted by dark black lines, which also means that they will be done in the black thread. So that's the DMC 310. So these stitches are done a little bit differently than the cross stitches. So we'll start with this section here. So this is the bottom part of our bee. So if we're facing this direction, this will be at the bottom stitch of that last row that we completed. In other words, this will be connecting to the head right here. But for our back stitches, we don't want to start the stitch there. So there's a reason they're called back stitches. So we want to go down to this point here where you can see it turns. So that is our first stretch of our back stitch. So you can see that will be when we have our bookmark facing this direction. So the long sides are up and down and the short sides are left to right. You can see that the corner, that point there, is one to the right and one down from that stitch that I showed earlier. So from the back to the front, we'll stick our needle in at that point. So we have one there and then one here. Now we are one to the right and one down. So just like before the cross stitches, we want to pull through from back to front, and we want to make sure that we have that tail end captured with our fingers for now in the back. If we want to, I like having a little bit of extra, but we don't want to have the tail end sticking up from the sides. So I'd say about an inch or so. And then, as the name implies, we go back to that point that connects to the head. And we pull through from front to back. And there's our first back stitch. Now, we want to make sure we capture that tail end as well, just like we did in the cross stitches. So, we are next going to do that long part right there. So that is 1, 2, 3 to the right and 1 down again. you notice a pattern that none of these stitches are more than 4 holes away from the last point in any direction. So that's 1 point, and then that's 4 there. So, going back to the back, you can see that's where we started in, so that's where we're counting from. So we're going 1, 2, 3, and then 4. Now since the thread is going to be going across like this, and we'll cross over where we have our thread now, I'm just going to leave it as is. But want to make sure we don't pull through like I almost did there. That's easy to do, as we've seen. And now back from the front, remember to keep that back tail secure. Go back again to that connecting point and pull through. And then there's our second part of the stitch. Next, from that point down there, we have that stretch of 3 that are a straight line. So we go 1, 2, 3 across. 2, 3 into there. And this is why I like to have a slightly longer tail when I'm doing backstitching. Because now I can pull this through and make sure that it is being captured as best as possible on that side. And now as you can see, give a little tug, the tail's not going anywhere. And we'll continue these back stitches just as we've done before, though now we don't have to worry as much about the tail in the back. And there we have our first antenna. So you can see we have antenna just like in the pattern there. Now we go up to the pattern. You can see that there's a second antenna that will be just a mirrored image on the opposite side as our first one. We also have our wings, the top wing and the bottom wing, which are also nearly mirrored images, and as well as our little tail and the trail that goes from our little stinger at the end, and you can find it continues over here. And each of these black lines is done with the black DMC 310 thread. And once these are all finished, we will have a finished Bumblebee bookmark. So remember, whenever you're finishing your backstitching, just like with cross stitches, if you run out of thread, or if you're finishing the project, or wherever you'd like to stop, you always want to secure your thread. So I like, especially when it's fairly close like this is, to go back under where we did the cross stitches and secure the thread in there. So just like before, we want to go under at least about 3 of these stitches here, and then pull through. There's 1, 2, and 3. And there we have it. We will check in again once our backstitching is complete.